I'm driving my blue RAV4, the second car in our convoy of two. It's early and the warm morning sun filters into the car from my left. My sister is in the passenger seat and two of my cousins are in the back row with my dog. We're heading down the highway to a camping spot for our annual family camping trip. I'm focusing on the multi-lane freeway in front of me when all of a sudden I hear my cousin behind me. "Oh no, we forgot the rice," she says. We had planned to make bibimbap, which means mixed rice in Korean, for one of our camp meals. With guidance from Google, we take an exit along the way and end up at an Asian restaurant in Milpitas, a city just north of San Jose. I park the car and we rush into the Hong Kong Macau-style fast food restaurant, while the other car waits in the parking lot. The employees in the kitchen could be heard chatting in Cantonese. One of the employees, an Asian lady, approaches the counter looking a bit confused. She asks how she can help us in English. We ask in Cantonese if it was possible to buy some plain rice. Acknowledging we could understand one another, replying back in Cantonese, she curiously asked why we needed rice so early in the morning. We explained the situation, that we needed it for camping and forgot some at home, which is now a few hours away. She looks confused, yet nods in understanding. She asks just one follow-up question. How much rice do you need? We ask for 2 containers worth, and she packs 2 styrofoam containers full, stacking them neatly in a plastic bag. The "Thank you, have a nice day" bag, lettered in red and all caps. She ties a quick knot with the looped handles to keep the boxes in place and waves us off as we leave. Yet, right as we leave the restaurant, I notice the white vinyl lettering on the glass door. The hours of operation. The place wasn't open for another couple hours. We had barged into a restaurant that hadn't opened yet. To be fair, the door was open. Getting rice at that moment was important for us, though. Our family camping trips were about eating good food just as much as it was about enjoying the great outdoors. Connie Lau understands what I mean. She's a park ranger at Yosemite National Park.
Pack really good food. Go to your local Asian grocery store and pack as many pantry items and snacks as you can.
Eating in pretty places isn't just a fun part of the camping experience for me and my family. It's also a compelling part of the Asian American history, and could be part of the reason Yosemite National Park and other natural areas in the West have been protected. Connie does a lot of work educating park visitors on the contributions of early Chinese immigrants, from building roads and infrastructure to cooking fine meals for dignitaries in the backcountry. While these early workers did a great deal of work making the region what it is today, their stories are often untold or even forgotten. That's why Connie does the work she does and why she joins the podcast. Welcome, Connie. Thank you for coming on to the show. Could you talk about who you are, a bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. My name is Connie Lau, and I am a park ranger at Yosemite National Park. Specifically, I work on the education and community engagement team, which is, people always ask what that means. So as part of the interpretation division, that means that my job is to inform the public about the park and pretty much inspire people to be stewards of the park, to take care of it. But for the education team, we work specifically with younger folks, usually 4th graders, but really anyone ages from 4 years old all the way to 25 years old. So we have college internships programs as well that we work with. And we work a lot with elementary school students and also high school students as well. And the community engagement side, we get to do a lot of really cool outreach kind of programs to really bring underrepresented groups into the park. So that can be Asian-specific groups or advocacy groups. That can be groups that are advocating for people with disabilities. That can be to celebrate Latino Heritage Month. That can be the LGBTQ community. That is our outreach there. And then also sharing those very inclusive, diverse stories of Yosemite that not everyone always knows about. And it's my pleasure and my entire team really to share those stories and to bring light to them as well.
While I was digging through finding about you, you were a high school teacher before you jumped into working with National Park Services?
Yeah, I was a high school teacher for 7 years in the Los Angeles area. I was an ethnic studies teacher for 9th graders specifically. And yeah, I really love teaching. Teaching is something I started with when I was teaching martial arts, and I really loved that. And I was also an outdoor educator at a summer camp for a little bit too. And then now I just tell other people I just changed my classroom for Yosemite. So I'm still teaching, but in a really, really nice classroom.
How did you get started with national parks? Because that's a bit of a transition, right? You are a teacher. I know you said you changed like your classroom setting, but how did that come about?
Yeah, so in my 20s, especially in college, I went to a lot of national parks, and that's when I really kind of learned about park rangers and what they do in the park. And I thought that was such a really cool job. Like they're essentially just teaching, but like in these beautiful places. And like I knew at that point I wanted to be a park ranger at some point in my life. So when the pandemic happened, that was really, really difficult. It was a really challenging time to be a teacher. The best part about teaching is definitely all the little interactions you get to have students when you see them, when you're have them in your classroom and you get to like give them a fist bump, or they make fun of your clothes or you make fun of their clothes. Just like, really fun, small interactions that you really miss when you're on Zoom all the time. That definitely like sped up the burnout. And I thought, hey, I'm just going to apply to a whole bunch of national parks and see what happens. I think I applied to, like, no joke, 50 different parks, like 50 different parks that year. And I told myself and I told my principal that if I got into my top 5 parks, that I would just go for it and become a park ranger. And my number 1 park was actually Yosemite. I just was really, really lucky in the timing. The year I applied was the year that Yosemite opened the Chinese laundry exhibit, which is an exhibit that talks about Chinese history in Yosemite. And when they opened for the full season that following year in 2022, they were like, wow, it'll be really great. We can have a ranger that can speak the language of this history, including specifically Cantonese, which is my mother's tongue. And I can also speak Mandarin as well. I just got really, really lucky in terms of just the opening of that exhibit and me deciding to apply that year. I think there are over 400 applicants that year. And it's, I feel really, really lucky that I just happened to apply that year and that I had the skill set that they were looking for.
That's awesome. What's your favorite part of Yosemite?
My favorite part of Yosemite?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's hard. Gosh, I really love the giant sequoias. There's something really special about our big trees. I always tell my visitors I'm very humbled by them because, yeah, they're really tall and they're really big and they're the biggest trees in the world by volume. But I think one of the coolest things about them is how old they can be. The oldest sequoia that I think we know of is over 3,000 years old. And I just think of wow, like these giant sentinels, they're just here for literally millennia. And you're just like, wow, like if you could talk and share your stories of what you've seen and what you've heard and what you've gone through, and that'd be really, really cool.
Backtracking a little bit, you brought up that you speak Cantonese and some Mandarin, or are you pretty fluent? What's your heritage?
Yeah, so I'm Cantonese. My parents are Chinese, but they're actually from Vietnam. So I'm kind of in those Chinese-Vietnamese demographic there. All but one of my grandparents are from China, and then one of them's from Vietnam. They fled China during one of the wars, and then they fled Vietnam as well. So when I heard your podcast, Refugee Daughter, I was like, hey. But I'm Cantonese. I actually lived in Hong Kong when I was younger. I was born here, but we lived there until I was 7. So Cantonese is like definitely my best language in terms of I don't really have to think about translating. The vocab definitely needs help sometimes, but I can still mess around with it. Mandarin is like my 4th best language, you want to say, because I had to go to Chinese school. And I can kind of figure out what people are saying, enough of my Cantonese background, but sometimes I just like make up words that I use in Cantonese and they're just like, what on earth are you saying? But I can actually speak Spanish as well. So that's probably my best language after Cantonese.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, I struggled when I went to Beijing or like China years back with my parents, and I didn't know how to say restroom. And I was trying to translate it from Cantonese in my head, and I was like, it's totally wrong. Because it's in Cantonese, it's like sai sao gan, but for restroom. But I was looking for like the toilet. They were confused what I was asking. So what are some of the contributions that Chinese people have contributed to Yosemite and possibly other parks?
Yeah, I'm going to stick mostly with Yosemite, though I can talk a little bit about the rest of the country too. But in terms of Yosemite, I do want to give a quick shout out to Ranger Yan Yan Chan. She did a lot of the research that I'm going to be talking about today. And she's still a ranger at Yosemite, so it's really cool that I get to work with her. And some of the things that she found out and research about was, number one, I would say are the chefs. We have some really good Chinese cooks, pretty much. And there's some really cool history in the park. The first one is Tai Sing. And Tai Sing was a backcountry chef that was really instrumental in a lot of the first mapping missions, I guess you can say. So when the USGS, U.S. Geological Survey, were mapping the Sierra Nevadas for the first time, they had Tai Sing with them. And Tai Sing was just an incredible backcountry chef. So usually when we think about backpacking, I don't know, have you been backpacking?
Yes, I have.
What kind of food do you usually have? Is it good food?
I try to, well, it depends how intensive the hike and mileage it is, but usually you buy one of those freeze-dried pre-made packets, right, with the dry packet in it that you have to make sure you throw out, otherwise you accidentally pour water into it.
Yeah, so it's not usually the best gourmet food, but Tai Sing was incredible. He would do fried potatoes, he would have trout, he would make soup, apple pie, he had sourdough rolls, venison, really, really fancy good food that people were just really vibing about. And it's kind of cool. They actually named a peak after him in Yosemite because he was such a renowned chef for the USGS. And that was 1899. So it's called Sing Peak. And yeah, it's pretty neat to celebrate his history because in addition to working for the USGS, he was also the main chef for the Mather Party. And the Mather Party was that party of a lot of rich, influential white men that pretty much lobbied Congress to create the National Park Service. And pretty much Stephen Mather, who was going to become the director of the National Park Service, was like, hey, we're going to get all these people, we're going to take them to the outdoors, it's going to be gorgeous, it's going to be great, and they're going to be so inspired that all of them are going to talk to Congress and talk to the government and be like, hey, we need a separate park service, we need a separate system, agency to take care of these national parks. And a big part of that success, we want to say, is Tai Sing. It doesn't really matter how beautiful or how awesome your sites are. If you're hungry, if you're tired, you're not really going to enjoy it as much. And like I said, Tai Sing was just completely cooking up a storm for everyone. Just really incredible food. He even bought linen. He bought china plates. He had lanterns that he would light up. So it's really making it special. And I think it's really cool because the sourdough rolls, he'll have to start it from San Francisco. And he'll start getting them ready in the morning. And then he'll actually pack the rolls next to the mules. And because the mules are so hot, it actually makes the dough rise during the day. And he will actually have a little stove that he built and constructed every night, which I think is pretty cool. He kept meat fresh by wrapping them in newspaper and dunking that newspaper in the cold snow melt water. So during the day, that evaporation, right, is going to keep that meat cool and fresh as well. So just really creative. And I just think it'd be really cool just to think about all the really incredible food that you can have in the backcountry. We also have some really famous chefs in Wawona as well. Wawona is in our southern part of the park. We have something called Wawona Hotel. And two of the main chefs there were actually Chinese as well, Alui and Ayu. Ayu was actually the head chef there for over 40 years. So I think that's pretty incredible. They weren't cooking Chinese food. They were always cooking more Western food still. But they were just such great chefs that Ayu was actually recruited from the Washburn brothers, who were the owners of the hotel. So they were also laundrymen. So they were washing all the clothes, all the linens, all the towels of the hotel as well. And they were also, I think the biggest one is they were road builders. Have you been to Yosemite yet?
Yes, I have been to Yosemite. So we're on the part of Nevada where you can go through Tioga Pass, but usually when winter comes, it blocks that entire road from our side, so you have to go around. I haven't gone through yet because usually it's blocked, but I hear that was one of the roads that they worked on.
Yeah, which I think is a really impressive road. It is 56 miles long, around an average of 10,000 feet in elevation, which think about the lack of oxygen up there. And they built that road in 130 days, which is mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, they have to go through like before that there was just trees and brush, mountain that they have to go through, right?
Yeah, so they would have pickaxes, shovels, and blasting powder. That was like their main tools that they have. And I can't even imagine or fathom like how to even go about that, you know? But they did it. They also did the Wawona Road, which is from Wawona, which is in the southern part of the Yosemite, all the way to the valley. And that was a 23-mile road. They also actually made that one in the winter, which I think is even more wild.
Ooh, cold.
Yeah, I can't imagine just trying to build a road during a snowstorm. Again, only pickaxes and shovels and some blasting powder. Those roads were built by mostly Chinese immigrants. There were other European workers as well, but for the most part, a lot of Chinese immigrants, they were also pay less than their European counterparts. And then, of course, I think a big infrastructure that we have to talk about is the railroad, the Transcontinental Railroad. After that was completed, I think a lot of the Chinese workers came to Yosemite to build a lot of the infrastructure here. The reason why they did that was to bring in tourists, right, to come to these hotels and go into the valley. And definitely it would be a very different park if there wasn't all these different roads to inside the park itself. It's a really, really wild thing to think about when you go on these roads later and just like, wow, like someone created these like over 150 years ago and they were using pickaxes and shovels. So it's pretty neat.
That is really cool. It's interesting that you bring up the Transcontinental Railroad. I think a lot of people don't realize the Chinese contributions to making that happen because they were connecting like the two railroads on either end. It got lost in history just because that iconic moment when they put that last piece together. There's a photo and all the Chinese people that contributed to that were not in it.
We actually have a artist studio called Thomas Hill Studio, or just called Hill Studio. And he actually did a rendition of that famous moment, that golden spike. And yeah, even in that picture, in that painting, you don't really see that many Chinese people in it. So did you know that they actually recreated that picture with Chinese descendants?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, I think it wasn't in the last decade, but they recreated that picture with descendants of Chinese railroad workers. So that was pretty neat to see. In terms of just, like you said, like which stories are erased, what stories are emphasized, what stories are deemed important enough to share and preserve. A really important part of my job there too.
Why do you feel that is important to know?
You're asking an ethnic studies teacher that question. I don't know. I think, so I usually do not a game, but a question with visitors. Hey, like when you hear about Yosemite and you hear about the story of Yosemite, who do you think of? Like, what are some names that you can throw out? And without fail, right, it's always the same names that coming up, right? There's John Muir, is Theodore Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln, maybe Clayton Clark, James Hutchings. I can go on. And it's always the same 4 or 5 that will pop up. And I will ask the audience, like I ask my visitors, like, hey, like, what do you have in all in common? And you get some fun answers. They're like, oh, they're all environmentalists. They all have beards. And I'm like, yeah, what else? And then eventually they get it. Like, they're like, oh, they're all like older white men. And I'm not angry or upset at them. I just like, hey, like, I just want to ask this question and ask you to interrogate yourself. Like, do you think that story of Yosemite is complete? And all the time, every single time, all of them were like, no, that is not a complete story of Yosemite. And we can do so much better in learning how we can complete that story. Because when you think only the stories of John Muir, of Ansel Adams, of Theodore Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln, then like you're erasing so many other stories. And it's just, that's us a disservice, so much of a disservice to erase those stories and to not hear about them ever again, because it's just kind of erases all that very rich, complex, diverse, important, impactful stories of the United States. I think for Asian Americans, there's this idea that we were perpetual foreigners. Have you heard of that concept?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have.
Yeah. And just for listeners, perpetual foreigners, this idea that Asian Americans are always foreigners, right? Like, I think we get often asked the question of, where are you from? No, where are you really from, right? And I think that's something that as Asian Americans that we get that question a lot. But and a part of that is because the story of United States haven't really included us, right? If you don't include our stories from, over a century ago when we actually help with the infrastructure of the country, like how do people know that Asian Americans have been here? for generations have contributed, and just important as a fabric of the country, right, as anyone else. So I think it's really important to just kind of push those stories and those narratives and just ask people, like, is that a complete story, right? How can we make that a complete story? And who are we consciously or not consciously erasing if we only say that this is the main story?
How do your parents and family feel about that career switch?
Yeah, that's a great question. My sister loves it, I think. I have a twin sister. My mom, yeah, I think so. I did have a presentation recently. It was at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and a handful of my family members came, which was kind of cool. My mom definitely made a big deal out of it, which was kind of fun, but you know how it goes. And afterwards, she texted me and was like, "I'm really proud of you." And I was like, wow, I think I'm gonna like print out that text and just frame it on a wall and just I feel like I've reached my life's like that is it.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about your family. Like, was it like growing up, your childhood, having a twin sister, your parents or your mom?
Yeah, it's good. I would love to go back to Hong Kong. We left when we were 7 years old and haven't been back since. So it'll be awesome to go back there. I feel like I have a very nostalgic version of it in my head because that was 97. My sister, I think we're pretty close. I always say that we're sisters close. We're not twins close, but we're sisters close. We went camping as family, not a lot, but definitely like enough times that definitely have a good memory of like just camping. I think it was in Sequoia National Park or somewhere with a lot of really big trees. And just being outdoors was definitely part of a core memory per se. And in college is when I like started doing the summer camp counselor for UCLA Unicamp. So I did that for a good amount of time. And I call that a sprint, right? You're working for 1 week with these young people and then it's bam, bam, bam. You're so tired at the end of it, but that's it. And it's awesome. And decided to go into teaching, and that's the marathon. We get to have these relationships with these students for a long time. And as a freshman teacher, you get to do that for a really long time. You get to see them grow up on campus. And then, now I'm back to a sprint with Yosemite. So we'll see where I go. I think I am interested in going back into education at some point. I'm not sure when, but I think teaching will always be somewhere in my job description.
What's the significance of having a leader like with your background and ethnicity in this role?
Oh, gosh. That's a great question. Definitely want to shout Sharon Miyako. She's a Asian American woman that's the branch chief of field ops here in Yosemite. And I've told her this, but I just remember getting my first official letter to Yosemite. It was an offer letter. And then later down the line, like there was an email with all my supervisors in the chain. And I just remember seeing Miyako as the last name on the board. And I was like, oh my gosh, is this like an Asian woman? Like, that's my boss's boss? Like, not even my boss, but my boss's boss. Like, how cool is that? And I was like, oh, wait, did she like marry into that name? Like, I wasn't sure. When I finally met Sharon, like, yeah, she's 4th generation Japanese, 7th generation Chinese. And she was definitely the first like non-second generation Asian American I've ever met. And it was just like really, really cool to meet someone with her background and experience. But definitely very inspiring to have someone like that in a leadership role. And it's very clear that like her teammates and her colleagues and the people who work for her like really respect her. So it's been a really awesome experience having her in that role, in that position, just kind of like, hey, like that's someone I can speak to and talk to. And honestly, with Yan Yan too, like when I found out about Chinese laundry exhibit, I just like went on a whole like Googling thing of like, oh my gosh, can I find out all these different things about Yan Yan and what she's done and all her research. And she's also lived in Hong Kong as well and can speak Cantonese. And her last name is Chen. And it's just like, again, just like this, I've been really, really lucky at Yosemite that I have these older Asian women that I can look to that have been in the Park Service for like, 2 decades. And I think that's kind of wild, especially when you think about the National Park Service. It's only like less than 3% of the entire National Park Service are Asian American. So I feel really, really, really fortunate and really lucky to have them as role models for sure.
What would you say to those kind of at intersections, maybe wanting to be a park ranger or work for parks? What would you tell them?
To pack really good food. Go to your
Oh, that's a good one.
go to your local like Asian grocery store and pack as many pantry items and snacks as you can. I think that's definitely. I'm joking as I said it, but it's also very real. I think that's definitely something that I think you had to be ready for in terms of there is an isolation, right? We are again less than 3% of the NPS. I think that's something you have to get used to. I'm from Los Angeles, so like it was definitely a culture shock of like, hey, I'm mostly working with students of color. Most of my school were teachers of color as well. There were restaurants. I've had taco trucks like left and right everywhere. And then you come up here and it's complete opposite, right? So definitely being prepared for that. And I think I'm very happy and proud of the fact that I can adjust to those kind of changes and I can make my own community and got to learn how to cook all these different food. But yeah, definitely something to keep in mind. I think that's a big one. It's definitely the cultural aspects of it and also the food. As much as I think food is it's such an important part of our culture, is of our building community.
Did you ever struggle with your identity while you were growing up? You know, Chinese-Vietnamese, you came from Hong Kong and then you came to America, even though you grew up or you were born here.
Gosh, that's a great question. I haven't really thought about that as much. I think definitely a period of time where just having an ESL, English second language, and just people making fun of your accent, not being able to speak English very well. I think that definitely like push you to learn English as fast as you can. I don't think I was ever ashamed though of my background or of my culture. I think I was always like still proud to be it, even though like it definitely invited mockery or people making fun. My college admission essay was about rice. Like, what about your background makes you stand out and be a good candidate? And I just wrote about different types of rice that we have in California, because we have so many different cultures that have access to rice and have their own versions of rice and how we celebrate this really awesome staple. And I think that's how I talk about just really embracing the diversity of Southern California and why that's so important through something as simple as you would think as rice. So the Chinese-Vietnamese side, I think, has always been interesting because I usually ethnically just identify as Chinese. My parents, we definitely like had a lot of Vietnamese food, but they didn't really speak Vietnamese, but they spoke Cantonese. So I think it's really important to acknowledge their story, right? That they are refugees. I think that's it's a very important integral part, and I really want to honor like that story and that sacrifice.
That was my conversation with Connie Lau, park ranger at Yosemite National Park. For more information on this episode and the series, head to pbsreno.org/Refugee's Daughter. And a special thank you to Connie for joining the show. Subscribe to Refugee's Daughter wherever you listen to podcasts and give the show a rating and review. I'm Christina Lee, and thanks for listening. This episode was written by Christina Lee with production help from Divergent Point Media. Refugee's Daughter is a presentation of PBS Reno.